Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Communities Public Protection and Housing Scrutiny Review Board on Monday the 18th of November at 6 p.m. As Councillor Fowke reminded me, we're continuing our tradition of holding these meetings when it's raining. I don't know how we do it, but we have seemed to do it nearly every meeting so far. So we'll start off then heading through the agenda. So any apologies at all?
No apologies that I'm aware of, Chair.
No, fantastic. For item 2, late items to be introduced by the Chair, there are none for this meeting. So item 3, any declarations of interest at all? No, nobody, fantastic. Okay, so then item 4, so we've got minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September 2024. So anybody, anything to raise with the minutes at all? No, we're all happy to take those as read. Fabulous, thank you everybody. Okay, so move on then to item 5. So this is unauthorised encampments. So pop over to yourself. I'll just remind everybody, so when you speak for the first time, if you can just introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If you just give me 1 second whilst I just get a presentation loaded. Right, thank you, Chair. So just to introduce myself, Pop Gill, Acting Head of Community Safety. So I'm going to go through a number of items on unauthorised incursions, just to go over the background around planning and the current situation. Oh, it's showing as sharing on mine. Let me just try again. Sorry. There we go. Thank you for that, Paul. So yeah, just going to go over a few items on unauthorised incursion. So just the kind of current context in relation to sites and pitches and need within the city. The context of planning, I won't be going in depth, but just giving an outline of the considerations and the need for traveller sites within the city. I'll then move on to kind of the actual unauthorised encampments, giving an overview of the powers and processes that we can follow, then an overview of recent incursions and financial impacts over the last 2 years. No, my slides won't move. There we go. Okay, so just in terms of context around gypsy and traveller accommodation assessments, we are required to do these, and the last one was completed in 2023. There is an identified need for new permanent pitches by 2040, and the kind of key element here is that this is part of national planning policy. There isn't a duty on us to provide sites, but it is a part of national policy, and we need to meet those meet the identified needs either by allocating sites within the local plan or taking forward projects outside of the local plan within corporate land needs. So kind of the takeaway with this is that there is an identified need, there is a requirement for us to do this, and if we don't do it through the local plan, that plan won't be adopted, and the key risk there is that it does then start to put other priorities at risk. So the need for traveller sites has got to be taken into context in terms of the wider housing and planning needs. We do have one pitch within the city that's located at Russell Street, and it's a 17-pitch permanent facility. It's been there for a number of years and managed by Derby Homes. As I mentioned, the process of identifying permanent pitches is undertaken by planning, but it also involves estates and strategic housing to assess the capacity to deliver the number of pitches that have been identified as needed within the city. There have been a range of assessments that have been undertaken to identify the types and most appropriate type of land that would facilitate this. I know that's not a fantastic slide in that you can't read the red, amber, greens, but essentially the assessment is done against national policy, local plan policy, and site disposals. And that table on the right, I'll circulate these slides after the meeting, but the table on the right basically categorises different types of land across the city and the viability of those being suitable for traveller sites. It doesn't go into detail in terms of where those are or what those locations are. It's more the type of land, identifying it as green belt or brown belt type of land. Another key consideration here is that whilst the Gypsy Traveller Assessment has identified the need for permanent sites, the same criteria can also be used to identify temporary transit sites. And as you'll see once we get onto the incursions, part of the reason why we have those incursions is that we don't have sufficient permanent pitches available, but we also have no transit sites available that we can redirect travellers and gypsies to. In terms of what happens once we do get unauthorised encampments, there's two enforcement tools that are available. One which is responsibility of ourselves as Derby City Council, the other is the police powers under Section 61. I will say that Section 61 is far quicker, it's speedier. Those who've experienced incursions may not think so, but compared to the process that we as a local authority need to follow, it can be done within days, and you'll see from the recent incursion data that I'll put up on the following slide how quickly that can be enacted. And there are very specific reasons that need to be justified in terms of the police using their powers, which is usually around antisocial behaviour and criminal damage. We do have a process where we liaise with the police. Any incursion that occurs within the city, there's an automatic communication between the police and the community safety team, and we have joint guidance which we follow, which essentially means that the first ones on site will be the police to conduct an initial site assessment, and then that is followed up by public protection officers going out on site to, one, do welfare checks, but also to provide advice and guidance and to support the travellers in the short term around waste management. But within a day, within 24 hours, we will complete the notice to quit and get the court process started. What we do also try to do is keep members and internal communications teams up to date on a daily basis, just in terms of progress, because a lot, if you've had an incursion, there's a lot of emails start to fly around, a lot of mistruths start to go, so we just try and keep it concise now with one formal communication per day to keep everybody updated. And this is what I was essentially referring to when it comes to the Derby City Council process. As you can see, there is a lot of hoops that we have to jump through because we are reliant on courts, and ultimately, if the travellers do not move on, we are reliant on going back to court and getting a bailiff's eviction in process, and that can take a matter of weeks, depending on the court availability. As I mentioned, the key takeaway here is, whilst it shows the incursions in 2024, you'll see from date arrived to date moved on, some of those are very swift. We've got racecourse 9th of May, date moved on 13th of May, and again, that was partly because it was the police section 61 powers that we used. Similarly at Chester Green, and you'll see kind of an emerging theme there around ASB waste, especially human waste. As soon as that appears, the police can use their powers instantly, whilst we would still be going through the courts. Osmaston Park, as you can then see, is a bit of an outlier. Arrival 24th of July, but didn't move on until the 19th of August. But we had minimal ASB complaints coming through, no real complaints coming through from the residents in the area and park users, which is why then we had to go through the court process to move them on. And you can see that date range and how long that took. Similarly with Derby Arena, that was the last incursion, and I've not read the Telegraph today, but I'm sure there'll be a headline in there that they're back at the arena as of this morning, and we're serving the papers as we speak. But again, 22nd of September through to the 27th, it was that escalation in antisocial behaviour, theft and assaults that led to the police using their power. So kind of the reassurance to you is, where we can, we work with the police to use their powers. where we can't, we have to go through that court process. Got a couple of slides just showing the kind of the nature and cost of the incursions over 2023 and 2024. 2023, there were a number of incursions, and you will see that racecourse grounds were a repeated site for these incursions. Cost-wise, overall that year, it was just over £7,000 in terms of disposal, toilet and labour costs to clear the sites. Racecourse Park itself accounted for just under 3,500 of those costs. 2024, so this year, so I've done this on calendar years just to kind of make it easier. You can see that there have been fewer incursions this year, only 4 sites, 5 technically with Derby Arena having travellers again on it this year. The costs are comparatively low compared to last year, so £650 in total at the moment. And it's more around the disposal and the labour costs within those. Because we've had a history of incursions within the city, certain sites being targeted and also sites being vulnerable, because when we put preventative measures in place, other locations may become vulnerable where they've not previously had to deal with incursions. So this just gives an example of the type of works that are done, and most works are environmental. I remember the infamous episode at the Meadows Industrial Estate, where cast iron gates were put in place, and within 24 hours were taken down and sold as scrap. So we do look for environmental preventative measures where possible now, and as you can see, the majority are around traveller bunds and removable bollards to still allow maintenance and access. And there have been a number of sites, as you can see, that have benefited from those interventions. That's it in terms of overview and kind of scope of the incursions to date. So any questions or clarifications?
Fabulous, thanks, Pop. Councillor Pandey, saw your hand first.
Thanks, Rob, for the presentation, and thanks for giving us the information about this. First question is, if we have the site, like you're saying, Russell Street, and we do have a site for travellers to come and pitch in the city, and if they decide not to use that site and they go somewhere else, then what happens? And the second thing is that I saw Knightsbridge Bund over there, but Knightsbridge we rarely had any travellers, so I've raised that point time and again. We didn't need it, the bunds over there, but we got them now.
Okay. In terms of the first question, if we have a temporary or permanent site within the city and travellers decide not to use it, we do have the power then to redirect, and this is where also the Section 61 power can come in from the police, because we've made provisions available. Anything else then is an immediate incursion, so it's either redirect or enforce against that incursion. So having a site gives us a bit more, not flexibility, but a bit more power, because we have made that provision available. In terms of Knightsbridge, I'm not involved with the detail of that one specifically, but as I say, it's not always about incursions to date. There would have been considerations about vulnerability of sites as well, because the more preventative work we do across the city, the more it means that other sites will become attractive, I guess is the other word, and vulnerable to incursion. So as a wider preventative measure, that's why I would assume that Knightsbridge has been, the Knightsbridge work has been undertaken.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. The racecourse is in my ward in Chaddesden West, and we've experienced these unlawful encampments for over a long period, unfortunately. But as you mentioned, Pop, the encampment we had this year in May was dealt with exceedingly quickly in a matter of days, which was very gratifying for residents and people who use the park. So the question is, you've said that the reason you were able to move swiftly was because the police used their powers. A different law came into play on that occasion. The means of access has always been pretty similar, to be honest, on accessing onto the racecourse. So why is it that the police seem to be able to use their powers in some circumstances and not others?
It very much comes down to the kind of the evidence, and say where we can evidence the antisocial behaviour, we can evidence the criminal damage. We do need to go through a process with the inspector and then the chief inspector signing that process off. So it's not kind of an immediate, here you go, we're going to enforce against it. But it still takes a couple of days to build up that evidence base for them to then enforce. I can't speak on their behalf and say that they will do this every single time, but this is why we try and work with them to build up that case, build up the evidence pack, get the information from yourselves as local councillors, but also residents in the area, and ultimately they do their own internal process of evidence, the proportionate response, and then enforce. So it's encapsulated in a much smaller time frame, whereas, as I say, we have to then go through the other courts, but they still have to go through a process.
Councillor Ingle?
Yeah, thanks for that, Pop. Just thinking on the travellers site that we've got, how many moves in or out have we had over the last, 13 years it's been there now?
I'm not able to answer that question, but I can get the information from Derby Homes in terms of movement in and out.
My understanding is, Chair, that the same 17 families that moved on there in day one are still all there, so I don't think it's being used really to its potential. But if we could get the figures, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions from anybody? Councillor Falk? Councillor Pandy?
First of all, I did say thanks, but I think in the past few years, your team has done a good job in some of the cases. I think one of the cases, Osmeston Park, the encampment was there for a long period. Just to get the clarification, the Russell Street pitch, you said it's occupied at the moment, is it? It's
all the pictures at the
so they're not. So Russell Street is not. So if a party comes in, then we can't use Russell Street at the moment, can we?
No, you've never noticed it.
No, that one is fully occupied. So it's a 17 permanent pitch site, which is fully occupied. But also, I think that's part of the, I'm not going to say kind of the answers in the title, but because it's a permanent pitch, they are able to stay there long term.
So as a council, are we looking for a new land where the pitch can be made?
Yep, as I mentioned, this is being undertaken by Planning Estates and Strategic Housing as part of the Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment. That was reviewed in 2023. It has identified new permanent pitches that are required by 2040, and this will be taken forward primarily through the local plan.
I think if I can just quickly, Bob, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think if I'm right, through South Derbyshire's plan, they're talking about potentially putting a site just outside the city, but sort of close to us. Would that in any way, how would that influence sort of what we're potentially looking at if that site was to go ahead? Paul, happy if you step that one if you want
to respond to that one.
Paul Clark, Chair, Chief Planning Officer. Sorry, Matt. Each authority has to provide its own Gypsy and Traveller permanent sites. So South Derbyshire are choosing to provide theirs in policy on the edge of the city. We have to provide ours within the city, and we're looking at a variety of sites. If I may, South Derbyshire are taking an interesting view because they're getting developers to provide the sites. My view is we stand a better chance of looking at our own sites, land that we own, So we can actually dictate that piece of land is going to meet that need. It's going to be somewhere in the city, and it's going to be on, I think, publicly owned land. So some councillors are going to feel the pain, but it meets the overarching needs of the city. We need to find 14 pictures for the next local plan. It'll come out in the local plan review, but in the next local plan we need to find 14 pictures in addition to the ones that are provided on Russell Street.
Councillor Ingle, I think you wanted to come back.
If I may, Chair, thank you very much. My question is, these are classed as traveller site, but they're actually a permanent site. So my understanding is, when I was Cabinet member, was on day one, 17 families moved in and they're all still there. So we still have travellers coming into Derby and we haven't got anywhere for them to go. So surely should the next traveller site that we have to have in the city actually be for a transient? Because you're always going to get the people coming, so shouldn't it be for transient rather than permanent?
I think that's certainly an option, and as we said, through the local plan, those would be the considerations, and the site assessments. As I say, I know you couldn't see it quite when it was on the screen. Those site assessments can be used for transit just as well as permanent, but it all comes down to need, I think, and this is where the 2023 assessment comes into its own in terms of the type of site people are looking for. So again, we've got to look at it from both sides. We may want it as a transit where they're in, they're out, but from the travelling and gypsy community itself, they may need and require something quite different. So it is a bit of a delicate balance.
Yeah, Councillor Ingle just took the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask that question, but the point behind it is that if we're not providing a non-permanent site, then we can expect for travellers to roll up on land if we're not able to offer an alternative. So it would make sense to certainly look at that as the option.
Thank you, Chair. The question is again for the Russell Street pitch only. So when it was initially planned, was it supposed to be a temporary, like a transit pitch? No, it wasn't. So it was a permanent pitch from the beginning.
I can answer that, Chair, as I was a Cabinet member at the time. If you remember, just round the corner from that area, there was a travellers' site that travellers have been on for many years. So we worked with them to provide a permanent place for them to go so they'll have better conditions. And then, of course, we can also claim housing benefit for them and various things like this. So we actually get an income from it. So that was one of the thought processes behind it.
Okay, Councillor Ingle.
To Mr Clark, what areas in Derby are we looking at for sites for the SAD?
We are looking at all areas in Derby that the City Council own. Land ownership is key because I need to be able to provide those 14 pictures somewhere within the city. And probably, like Russell Street, all 14 together on one site. But it's early days yet because I've got to juggle housing, employment and the various other land uses, as well as retaining public open space and everything else. So it's early days yet, but I'm hoping we will come out for consultation summer next year on the local plan as a whole, because as Pop said at the beginning, we need this for local plan. It's one of the main, the inspector will sit at the dais and say, have you got gypsy and travellers, yes or no? If the answer is no, start from scratch again. So we need this for the local plan. But it'll be coming out hopefully next summer.
Councillor Nawaz.
Yeah. Paul or Pop can answer this one. The land next to, on Russell Street, already there's a spare land there. There's nothing happening with that. Why can't we have it there? And second one, they're knocking Cotton Lane police station down. There could be land there as well available.
I can come back on that. I'm aware that we have had an application in on the police station for a rather tall pair of buildings, which may or may not see the light of day. The remaining land, I think, is public open space, which might be, if we own it, in the mix. But then do we want, as a council, to have the existing pitches on Russell Street and the new ones put together in the same area, or would you want to disperse them across the city somewhere else? That's a part of the consultation process for next summer.
Okay, any more questions from anybody at all? Okay, thank you, everybody. I think that we've sort of uncovered quite a serious point there to take forward in terms of how, when the local plan does come out, how things are phrased, because throughout the talk about having a more permanent site, which was going on when I was in the cabinet as well, there was always the sort of assumption it would be a transient site, where some people would come on, stay for a week, leave again, more people would come on. If we're creating a permanent site, it's almost the difference between a sort of a traveller site and a caravan park, in a sense, that we're essentially just moving families on there, allowing them to stay there. And the issue then, when the next people come along and want somewhere to go, we have the same issue all over again. And unless we're going to provide for everybody, we provide for the number that are there, and that's the end of story, really. So I think in the local plan, or any of the documents this is in, it really needs to be spelled out clearly whether this is a permanent site for a set number of people, or whether this is a transient site that will be used almost on a weekly basis, in a sense, based on the figures we've got for people that are going to be here to use it. I think that's something that really needs to be spelled out clearly. And when we talk about the local plan and how we have no duty to provide this, but it's something, in a sense, the documents we ought to be providing. If we don't provide it, can we have one forced on us? What's the circumstance if we don't provide one?
Chair, if we don't provide one, the inspectors won't force it upon us. They'll just say your local plan doesn't meet the required criteria. The criteria is we need to find 14 permanent pitches. We have to provide. I'm struggling to find that site, and yet we're perhaps also talking about a transient site. So I have to provide for the local plan 14 pitches somewhere in the city. And preferably on
Just to clarify, Mr. Clark, they've got to be 14 permanent pitches.
14 permanent pitches from the Gypsy and Traveller assessment that was done 2023.
So anything transient then would be additional to that, okay. And obviously we have to provide it through the local plan. What are the consequences for us if we don't?
We end up with no local plan, which means house builders will be focusing on house builders, because that's usually the penalty, focusing on housing applications where we don't want them. They'll bring them forward where you don't want them, and it's planning effectively by appeal, because you won't like it, go to appeal, we will lose because we haven't got a local plan, and then we haven't got the infrastructure, etc., to support reasonable development. I would say further that house builders like to build on greenfield sites. Green belt is precious, green wedges are precious, and the local plan drives housing to the right locations, right development, right time. We need to plan for it. That's why I need a local plan.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And just going back as well to one of the first points that Councillor Rawson raised around the sort of police involvement. So a few of the ones on there, Springwood Leisure Centre was mentioned on there in terms of I think it was about £350 it cost us for that one in 2023. But we'd had an encampment there in 2021, and we then installed height barriers so that we wouldn't be able to have we either couldn't have an encampment again, or the barriers or the locks on them would have to be damaged or broken in an act of criminal damage in order for an encampment to take place. That happened, the locks were broken off, the vans were driven on, and the police action to that wasn't what it would have been if I had broken the locks and driven my vehicle on that. And we then faced the comments that we faced around the fact that people were being treated in a different way. So how are we going to sort of work closer with the police? Can we work closer with the police on issues like that, around where we put a barrier in place with a specific purpose that it would work unless it was broken? It was broken, and then nothing really happened as a result of that.
All I can assure you, Chair, is that we do have this joint protocol in place now. Police are the first ones on site. Prior to the protocol coming in earlier this summer, it was public protection officers going out on site in the first instance. We've switched that around. The police are taking that initial responsibility. We have a very specific Operation Bends, which all of these incursions are labelled under and investigated under. So I'm reassured that we're moving in the right direction. Proof will be in the future pudding, but I'm assured that we have got a better relationship now.
Okay, thank you, Pop. Any further questions for anybody at all? No, in that case, thank you, Pop, for bringing the report. And we'll go on then to our grounds maintenance update. So over to Lee and Owen.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just to introduce myself, my name's Lee Wheatley. I'm Service Manager for Grounds Maintenance and Arboriculture. And I'm here today just to give a brief update about the grass cutting service that the City Council's grounds maintenance team have done, particularly in this year. I'll give a brief description of the team and how that's made up, the main challenges faced, particularly in this year, and go over some actions that's being worked on to help mitigate those challenges going forward. So the grounds maintenance team you can consider is split into two. So one half or one portion of that looks after the Derby Homes contract. They fulfil the grounds maintenance for the Derby Homes areas. So there's around about 230 communal sites and then around 470 individual garden maintenance scheme properties of which residents buy into. And those sorts of activities are typical grounds maintenance activities. So that's ride-on mowing, strimming, blowing, hedge cutting, weed spraying, those sorts of activities. The city grounds maintenance team, they look after over 400 parks, including the 5 premier parks. They look after sports pitches, grass verges, roundabouts, all 16 cemeteries, including the crematorium, so quite a wider range of green infrastructure. Both teams do litter collection as well, or litter activities, but the City Council team in particular, they look after the litter collection across the green open spaces. They also do collect fly tip waste when it's on those green open spaces and empty the 609 litter bins on those parks and open spaces as well. In terms of budget, there's an overall budget for the city maintenance team of around about £1.7 million, of which 1.4 is taken up in salaries, so it's mostly taken up by boots on the ground. It's worth noting that since 2022, there's been a 17% reduction in the overall budget. That's been predominantly in staff reduction. So the overall number of gardeners available for the city maintenance is 25. In terms of operational challenges, just to talk about how we kind of measure our performance, our key kind of metric is the frequency in which mowing takes place as we work around the city. So there's a north and south just for operational reasons and flexibility amongst the workforce and resilience. It's split into two, a north and a south. We start in Ward A and then we finish in Ward Z, if you like, and then we start again. And the sort of frequency is measured between the start and second cut in Ward A, if you like. Typically, we publicise that we try to turn around that mowing frequency in 6 weeks, and that's what we would consider typical and good. This year, at its longest period, it was around about 10 to 12 weeks, and that's for a number of reasons, which I'll come on to. So one of the main contributing factors we can claim is climate change. So for the 23-24 winter period coming into this year, it was the 8th wettest on record, and what with higher sort of average temperatures, that just meant the start of the mowing season on the top of the winter growth just romped away. It was an exponential amount of growth. So that has a few kind of implications. So if Ward A is cut, and then as time goes along, that exponential growth means that, I don't know, a couple of weeks after that's been cut, it's already long. And we're still maintaining the rest of the city. By the time we get back to it, it's so long that the machinery is really struggling to cut through it. And so that second cut, the machinery is already slower. I won't bore you with the detail, but the typical ride-on machinery we've got has 3 cutting units. The outer 2 cutting units can be lifted to go around obstacles and things. And the vegetation was so dense that we're usually riding with just 1 mowing unit because the machines didn't have the horsepower to go through the thicker grass. One of the reasons for that is that the machinery is towards the end of its life. So we typically expect 10 years from these machines. We've reduced that now to 8 just because they're not lasting as long in that denser vegetation. They're being strained more. So 6 weeks would be good. At our longest period, 10 to 12 weeks, is where we were this year. So in terms of machinery, where I've spoken about the increased stress that the machinery is taking, it was also older. We've suffered a number of breakdowns throughout the year, and that was for A, the machinery is older, so it's starting, the components are starting to fail. B, the grass was longer, so as the grass is cut, it's clogging up the radiators more, so they're more prone to overheating. And yeah, I think that was machinery. We've also had challenges in terms of recruitment. So where we've had people leave our employment, it's not been that easy to get people back into those posts, especially skilled gardeners, back into those posts quite quickly. So Staffline, who is our agency provider, it isn't unique to grounds maintenance, it affects other services as well, but they've been struggling to get agency people in. We wouldn't normally take on agency people where people are off sick or on leave, because then we're paying twice for an operative as well. So we typically only get relief workers in where there's a vacancy, and it can take a little bit of time. So while we might have had 25 posts maintaining the city, in reality it would have been less than that throughout the year. There's also something to be said about, at the minute, there's a skilled and unskilled gardener, and the environment the environment privately outside of the council is quite attractive in terms of gardener rates of pay compared to our own. So the offer isn't quite as attractive for what we advertise. There's also something to be said about litter management as well. Gardeners do the litter management when they're not doing, whilst they're doing the litter work, they're not mowing. So there's just something to consider there. So of the inquiries, complaints that we received through firm steps, so the official sort of channels, we had over 500 throughout the year, but that's quite a conservative figure. Lots of inquiries came through council portal or direct via email from sister teams throughout the council and businesses and things like that, so it would have been higher than that figure. And the flavour of those inquiries was very much of the overgrown nature of grass. And that's based upon previous years gone by of more manicured areas. So if you imagine a frequency of 6 weekly down to probably double that, it's quite a difference. I wanted to mention environmental initiatives briefly. So there's been some talk around No Mow May, so that's something to help spring get going if you're not aware. So for the period of May, typically in the past we've not mown, and that's just to give a springboard for nature to get going coming out of winter, like insects take a hold and whatnot. We didn't do No Mow May this time round because the vegetation was growing so fast, and if we left the month of May to grow, we wouldn't have been able to cut it in June. The machinery wouldn't have cut it. But if the climate's very similar going forward, we might have to have a similar approach. But if it's drier, then we will entertain No Mow May again.
Can I just check very quickly on that one? When was the last time we did No Mow May? Was it 2023?
Yes, Chair. Yeah. Previously, we've done quite a bit of wildflower planting in key areas, which, with varying success depending on the ground conditions. Wildflower planting is very good. It offers lots of benefits in terms of biodiversity, but it also gives visual impact for residents and visitors to the city. So it's really a real positive move. We've done less this year just because of resources in terms of the amount of money to spend on seed, which has gone up exponentially. But also it isn't just chucking some seed down and letting it grow. It needs some preparation. The area needs cutting up, spraying off so there's no competition for the wildflower. It needs cutting further in the year and things of that nature. But we have been working with colleagues like neighbourhoods to put in some wildflower sites, Derby Homes as well. And we're talking to colleagues internally to get some resource to help bring some of that back, like advertising on islands, getting some of that income revenue to help pay for consumables. Looking a bit broader about what other authorities do, there's quite a broad spectrum. So there's the Erewash is an example where they've, apart from a few locations like key islands and sports pitches and things like that, they've pretty much said, we're going to leave the lot, we're going to rewild it all. Biodiversity is absolutely key for us. So there's that extreme. And then there's also people like Derbyshire, they'll cut urban areas very similar to what we have achieved this year, so around about 5 cuts a year. So there's a bit of a spectrum there. There are some really great examples of where people have got grassland management plans that detail the different types of green open space throughout the city and how they're going to be maintained within the context of how that space is used within the community. So it's not just about it's a big green open space, let's cut it and manicure it. You know, are there dog walkers on there? Is it used for events? You know, lots of different things. And then tailoring the maintenance regime specifically to the need of that green open space. So in terms of actions moving forward, there's kind of the short-term and the medium-term ones. The short-term ones, these are all being worked on as we speak. So digitising the schedules, it's all paper-based at the minute. So we're moving to a digital system which is going to help with performance management. It's going to help get that information, hopefully, to our digital assistants onto the web and help customers get access to the information from the system rather than from people, and cut down that volume of email traffic and inquiry traffic. So the equipment's in place, logins are set up. That should be in place for the next mowing season. We're looking at low maintenance landscaping. This is within the wider context of a grassland management plan. So we're going to look at areas where perhaps we don't need to mow. Maybe they can be turned over for wildflower areas or wider biodiversity needs. But we're going to have a look at these areas in some granular detail, holistically, and bring in different departments. So it could be, you know, as Paul mentioned earlier, it could be taking into consideration travel incursions. It could be having a look at the active living requirements throughout the city. Lots of different connotations there. We're making some upgrades to the machinery. So we're entering a period of 2 to 3 years where we're replacing the standard ride-on machinery, and we're reducing the number of typical ride-on machines for something that's more capable of getting through thicker grass. The trade-off to that is that machine is slower when you don't have that thick grass. So it's a bit of a trade-off, a bit of a gamble that the inclement weather that we're getting, the warmer climate is here to stay. So we're just tweaking the vehicle, plant and equipment that we have. Enhanced communication, I touched on it a minute ago, but taking advantage of the digital assistants, getting them plugged into our new digitised mowing routes, just so that information is more readily available for residents. And also making sure that communication is better managed. So if we are looking at trialling sites where we're going to leave them to return to nature, that there's some more thought there. So it could be a stake in the ground to explain to people passing by that this is a trial site. You know, so it's telling people there is an end to this if there's enough objection to it, or maybe there's a lot of support for it, but it's not just pushing it onto the city. More longer term or medium term, I suppose, is to produce a grassland management strategy, a bit more of a formal one. That's going to be, again, holistic. So it's not just about manicuring spaces, it's about what's the biodiversity need for the city in these areas. Looking at our partnerships to see if we can gain any support and help through those channels. It could be businesses to adopt, a bit like they support the islands, they sponsor the islands. Can they sponsor green open spaces, smaller bits of land, either by monetary reasons or maintaining it themselves? And also looking at internally where we can develop skills. We do this already, but there's definitely some scope to have a look within the resources, not just within the grounds maintenance team, but a little bit further afield in the wider department to see if we can upskill or introduce skills into colleagues that might be able to be shift more dynamically when we get peaks. So how can I word this? The demand for growing, so grass cutting, varies throughout the city, throughout the year, but the actual resource stays the same. So we're always going to be better or worse by default. And it's about having that resource being more fluid to move it into those peaks and out of the troughs a bit more. That was it, I think, Chair. There's a bit more detail in the actual report, but I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic, thanks Lee. Any questions from anybody at all? Councillor Pandy.
Thank you for the presentation, Lee. You mentioned about the grass verges and the thing that, you know, some of the councils are not cutting grass verges. And to be honest, I have driven around Nottingham, and when you drive around Nottingham, you can see, I think it's Ring Road where you can see we are bee friendly, and they stopped cutting the grass verges on the diversions, on the dividers basically. So even on our Ring Road, it's Manor Road, where the grass wasn't cut for a long time, and then you cut it. Is there a direction? Are we taking a direction? Because I think it's high time now that we take a direction. We can basically identify the patches or identify the areas where we don't want to cut the grass, and that way you can free up some of the machinery and the staffing. So are we going to do that? Because as a councillor, as a resident, I wouldn't mind seeing that, as long as we know which areas would be, going for the sustainability, the wildflower meadows and those kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. So for no real reason, I was planning on starting in a ward, Mackworth, and just really going down to some granular detail with maps internally with the team, starting to look at these green open spaces. And there's different ways of mowing. So if it's tractor mown stuff, big gang mowing, the larger bits of space, they're going to be cut more frequently because it's a big tractor going through with like a 7-foot mower. That's going to be cut quite frequently. Other areas, like the outer bits, are more detailed nooks and crannies. That's our rider machinery, so the frequency of that is going to be longer. So the answer to your question is yes, we're going to look at those areas in the city, the whole city, and then as part of this grassland management plan, we'll eventually publish, after consultancy and lots of work with other departments, because we don't want to have unintended consequences down the road. We don't want to be maintaining it a certain way, leave a big piece of green open space long when there's event space high, planning events in the middle of it all year round kind of thing. So we will come up with a plan that says that grass verge is going to be mown this many times a year or not. And that bit of open space, that specific bit of open space is going to be maintained at this frequency in this manner, and the reasons why. So that's the ambition, yeah.
So can we do it this year? And also with the wildflower, I think if your council does the wildflower meadows, we need to go for more sustainability and not the ones, that only comes one time. We need to go for the ones, you do it once and then we can have them year after year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good point. So the wildflower approach, where we have to spray off the ground, cultivate the ground, put the seed down, come back and cut it, has that visual impact. It's really bright and vibrant, but it isn't particularly great for nature because you're killing the ground and all the rest of it. Perennial sort of seed, where it's got that year-on-year colour, it doesn't look as vibrant, but there's a phrase I saw the other day which hits the nail on the head: nature isn't neat. And so just because it isn't pretty for us doesn't mean it's not beneficial for nature. So you're absolutely right there. We'll not be able to get the complete grassland management plan in place within a year. That's more the medium term. What we will be able to do is identify these areas and then start to have a think about those low maintenance areas initially. It's just because the city's quite big when you look at it zoomed in, and there's lots of green pockets of tiny green open space everywhere, and we want to get it right, really.
Yep, Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, 2 questions, if I may. One shamelessly parochial concerning my ward in Chaddesden West and the Nottingham Road Cemetery, which you've mentioned in the report. Thank you. Just to ask, is there a plan in place for next year to hopefully avoid some of the issues that we've had this year? And secondly, in terms of litter management, this is one that affects across the city. I know it is difficult, but it's always been a perennial bugbear of many councillors for seeing the grass cut, and if the litter pick's not been done the day before or just prior, you end up with loads of bits of litter being chopped up by the mowers, and particularly where it's aluminium cans and things like that, you start getting into, you know, harm for animals, dogs being walked and so on. So, as I say, I appreciate it's difficult, but is there a way of having a really joined up approach to it so that you do the litter pick the day before and then the mowers turn up the next day to cut the grass?
Thank you very much. So the Nottingham Road question. So this year just gone, we managed to get some support from Balfour Beatty. They came in and assigned a team for 2 or 3 days, which helped a little bit. We had additional agency staff working in there. We also had community payback working in that site specifically. We advertised for overtime, but the overtime rate isn't that attractive, so we didn't get any uptake on that. And we also asked and went out to price for some subcontracted works on that site as well. So it has had a lot of attention, Nottingham Road Cemetery. It's just the rate of grass growth has just been horrendous, really. So it's how much time we want to invest in that one site, because it's the same team that maintains the rest of the city. So we can maintain Nottingham Road Cemetery at a greater frequency, but at the detriment to every other ward, really. So I think we've kind of got a balance there, but the approach going forward would be very similar to the citywide approach. So we've had maps out of Nottingham Road Cemetery. There are some older areas which they've got war memorials in. So what we're planning on doing is leaving those sites to perhaps a once a year cut, advertise what we're doing there, but we'll make the offer that if you have a loved one and somebody wants to visit, we'll mow a desire line through to that plot if you let us know. And that just means we're going to be able to focus resources on the more frequently visited areas, the baby plot as well. So, yeah, there is a bit of a strategy there. The one about litter, yes, so it's gardeners pretty much do all the litter work as well. With longer grass, it presents challenges about seeing litter and things of that nature. I'll be honest, if everybody got off the mower and walked the entire site and then mowed it, we'd be in a right mess. So what they tend to do is they'll sort of have a look around as they're going along, they'll stop, they'll get off, they'll pick those bits. It's just much more difficult spotting longer grass, so the answer to that would be reduce the areas that we have to mow more frequently through this more detailed look at what we want to mow. And then those areas are going to be at such a frequency that we'll be able to spot the litter and pick it more thoroughly. Okay.
Councillor Ingle?
I love the term rewilding. It's just an excuse to save money most of the time. Go on.
Have I said rewilding once?
I believe you did, yeah. On several occasions.
It must have slipped out because I've been very conscious of saying it.
On several occasions, that's why I brought it up. It seems to me, Chair, that this year all councillors got it in the neck. Most of the time people were saying to us, are you going to use a combine harvester? Are we going to start selling the hay? I understand that there was problems with agency staff, we couldn't get them. Are those being addressed so then we won't have problems with agency staff moving forward, we'll be able to get them? And also, Chair, if the equipment we've got is not up for the job, shouldn't we be replacing it with something that is up for the job?
Thanks very much for those. So, yeah, we're looking at the agency. We're talking to them fairly frequently about trying to get people on their books. We're obliged to go with staff line, though I understand we can advertise wider. That means we'll get interest from up and down the country, which often means we're wasting time interviewing, going through processes with people that are never going to show up. So it's not unique to us. Refuse are suffering it as well as streets as well. So we are looking into that. Ideally, we wouldn't be so reliant on agency. It's not so much of an issue for the city side. There's been 2 or 3 agency on throughout the year, more the Derby Home side, but yes, we're looking into that. The replacement machinery, so we've currently got 16 of these typical ride-on machines. We're reducing that to, apologies. We've got 16 ride-on machines, 13 of which are the normal one. 3 are slower, but they can cope with heavier grass. We don't want all of them that type because they're really slow. So if we had a really dry year, would be slow by default. So we're reducing the amount, those 13 Roborine ride-on machines that are a bit quicker, to 10, an increase in the number of machines that can cope with thicker grass from 3 to 6. So we don't want to do too much, but so we have changed the machinery, and that machinery will land this financial year. So for the next mowing season, we'll have 3 more machines that can cope with that kind of heft if we get a season like we have had this year. Any more than that, I think we'd struggle. The benefit of that machine as well is it's easier to operate, so we'll have more machinery that can be operated by lesser skilled people. So there's multiple benefits there, really.
Yes, thank you very much. Your lads do an incredibly hard job, and we do see them around, and we do appreciate what they do. In particular, Mr. Smith, if you could pass on our thanks to him.
He'll love that. Thank you.
Councillor Fount, to see your hand.
I'd just like to ask you, when you've got a plan that you say you're putting together, can we have it communicated better for the general public? Because it's us that gets it in the neck first. All right, we pass it down the path and then you pick it up. But if we could just, it was like no mow May. Perhaps I'd got my head in the sand or the grass. But it was only sort of after the event that I found out about no mow May. But if we can have the information, we can spread it about as well as you. And the second question is, we see all over the city that there is sponsored islands. Are these sponsors not supposed to be helping you more by either providing resources to look after the island or doing them yourself, like you mentioned before? But there's so many around the city that just look a mess, but they've got the sponsor's name on it, and so you're getting it in the neck. But people should be paying for these things if they've got their name on it, promoting their business. What's the situation with that?
Thank you very much. The comms point, I'll take that on the chin. We can definitely do comms better. We've been not brilliant at it in the past, so there's definitely ground to be made up there. The sponsorship one, so I spoke with the sponsorship team a couple of months ago, and they're quite happy to send some of that income our way for the maintenance of these islands, because at the minute grounds maintenance don't get any of it. So they're happy to send some of that our way. It would probably be less for the cutting of the island and more for vibrancy works, but that vibrancy works wouldn't happen without some kind of maintenance to the island. Some islands are more tricky than others. Some attract traffic management to get on them, so that becomes quite an expensive affair. But the long-term goal is I've spoken with Highways. I've got their 5-year plan, and where that's going to happen, resurfacing is going to happen around islands. We're going to take advantage of the traffic management then, jump on the island and gut it. So hopefully it's a bit more maintainable going forward, because some have been like they have for years and years and years, and they've just become their own thing, yeah. So.
Because also, picking up what you just said, how come you're not getting the money who do the work? Has it just been channeled into other bits of the council? Because ultimately you're responsible for cutting the islands or making them nice and neat. How come you're only getting a bit of that money passed down? Where's the rest going?
I can't answer that question, but it did prompt the conversation with them. Yeah.
Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and the work you guys do despite, climate change and everything else. I was just looking at the figures that you've got from Fernstep, is it? And there are 329 new grass cutting requests. So I understand these are all from members of the public, is that right?
That's as
That's right.
Yeah.
So is there any kind of, because obviously I think some of the other councils have echoed as well, we get lots of direct kind of stuff from the public, but if you guys are getting lots of data about one specific area, say, I don't know, 50 people in the same week have complained about the same thing, how is that flagged up? What's the way of, because there might be the odd person that's just, you've only got one person complaining about one area, so what's the process in terms of filtering that out? And again, I think in a communication sense, it'd be good to kind of know.
Thank you very much for that. Really good question. So at the minute, it's completely paper-based, so there is no capturing of that other than the officer that's receiving it. If that officer gets a dozen in their inbox that day, that probably prompts them to do something and prioritise that particular area. Going forward, the digital system we're using is going to be Confirm, which other parts of the council use, and that's primarily for the fact that it does workflow, so sending people out to jobs or defects, but it also does asset management. But so what will happen is that all that information will get captured within Confirm, so we'll have a lot of performance information around number of frequency of visits to a particular site, frequency overall getting around the system, the city, but it'll cover all sorts of things like, you know, how often and where we spray. So when we get inquiries about glyphosate and things of that nature, we'll have some very granular detail about that. Another thing, so fly tipping, it's going to capture everything we do, so we'll be able to respond to requests for information much more readily. Hopefully there'll be, I think it's Fix My Street, I think Street Cleansing use it, where people can put in requests straight through the website. That'll go into Confirm. That's the plan. So it raises jobs straight to the ground crew, if you like. So it cuts out that buffer in the middle where delays can happen. So it's a positive step. Big undertaking going from few digital systems to this all-encompassing one. But I'm hoping the main bits of it are in place for the start of the mowing season. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions from anybody? Councillor Nawaz?
You know, cemetery paths, is that your job to clean them and everything?
Yes.
And they're not regular done, are they? Because I've recently had complaints from the Muslim side of the, cemetery, and I took a walk down as well, and the grass was really quite high.
Yeah, thank you for that. So that particular plot is gravel, isn't it? So originally that was maintained by, I can't remember the community group that used to look after it, but it was maintained by a Muslim community group. That's ceased. So we had conversations with bereavement services about, we'll spray that off, so we'll weed kill that, but we can't trim it because it's gravel, so we're going to cause a bit of a mess. So we will spray that off going forward. No, we can't spray off in the winter because it needs leaf coverage to take the glyphosate in. So it'll be a summer activity to keep it down. We could probably trim it to a point and then blow it off, so it gives that initial kind of cut, and then spray the rest off. We'll do the way around.
That's a fact.
Could I ask this question to you, actually? That because from what the presentation said, this particular department is having cuts at all the time. Can we not pass through to the Cabinet or to the Council that this is an emotive subject that every single one of us here gets it in the neck, and I'm not blaming these guys at all. They're doing the best they can with a difficult situation. But can we not have it put forward that this is brought up, that this department is funded better than it is at the moment because they seem to be understaffed, the machinery is wearing out, and like I say, every single councillor in here must get complaints about this, especially in spring, on a daily basis.
We can do exactly that. Councillor Fowler, do you want to draft up a form of words?
I'll talk to you.
Okay, any more from anybody at all? I think I'd agree entirely really with everything that's been said, and obviously, Owen, we had a chat the last week when you came on a walkabout to Oakwood Park with us, and I think every councillor in this room and every councillor in this council can tell you what the feedback from residents was about grass cutting this year. And figure 4.6 is a little indication. I probably got that many messages, texts, phone calls myself, plus my two colleagues in my ward, plus every other councillor in the council. I can't count the number when you count your emails, Facebook messages, phone calls, texts, tags in comments on community groups, stopped in the streets, everything else. And none of those really are going to be recorded because from a certain point, and I'm pleased to hear the sort of that communications needs to be involved, because from a certain point, I think all councillors were saying, look, we aren't getting the answers, we don't know, you're going to have to go straight to the service and ask them, which then increased the workload for you guys, because you were then having to reply to people and get those messages out to people, which meant that people were coming to us, we were having to bounce them back to yourselves, they were then coming back to us again, and we didn't have those answers. But I think one really important point to echo is it is a thankless job, and you know it's not about personally blaming anybody for this. We know how hard the job is in terms of being out there every day, trying to get everything done, especially in the conditions that we were in, especially with the bumpy year that we had for grass growth, and especially with the expectation that people are out there in the pouring rain or the boiling sunshine. There is often that expectation people need to be out doing this sort of job. But from the residents' perspective, they see grass cutting as a basic, and I use air quotes for basic service, that they pay for out of their council tax and they expect to be done. Similar really to bin collections in that sort of a sense. And I'm very glad we didn't go down the error wash route of things. Having been on the campaign trail there during the general election, the feedback in places like Borrowash and West Hallam was entirely against the fact that grass vergers were just being left. And I was glad that wasn't what we were doing. But from a council perspective, it felt like that was what was happening because we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know when things were going to be cut. I only learnt a few months ago that we didn't do no mow May, because as far as I was concerned, Oakwood didn't get cut in May, and other areas didn't get cut in May. So we didn't do it, but we did it because we didn't have those cuts in that period of time. And obviously Nottingham Road Cemetery has been raised a lot. I mean, the feedback from that was substantial. But even just for people going to a local park, you know, they were stepping in dog mess that they couldn't see because it was hidden by the long grass. They weren't enjoying the trips out, and then they got home and the grass verges still hadn't been cut. And it was creating a lot of anger that us councillors bore the brunt of, probably more than anybody. But of course, we know your teams never ever would set out to do a bad job. You guys do the absolute best that you're able to do with the resources and the year that you have, and we're really grateful for that. But on the communication change, I know we had a good discussion about this the other day, I want to sort of use the example of Uber in a sense, and obviously other private hire and taxi firms are available, but I want to use that as an example because there was always the belief in terms of taxi journeys that waiting for the taxi was something that annoyed people. Having to wait around, not necessarily knowing when it was going to turn up, that was the thing that annoyed people. And Uber kind of changed that in a way because I booked one the other day and I feel the same if I'm told to wait 4 minutes as I do if I'm told to wait 10 minutes. Because I know at the end of the period of time I'm waiting, the vehicle's going to turn up. I'm not ringing to find out where something is. I'm not trying to find out. I don't feel out of the loop. I don't feel uninformed. I know I wait this period of time and the thing I want happens. And we didn't have that this year with grass cutting because we were told, you know, we'll get round to it as soon as we can, we're working as hard to, but there was no, we predict 4 weeks, we predict 2 weeks, we predict 6 weeks. In Oakwood, we were guessing when Chaddesden started and then when Spondon started, we think we're the next one, but we weren't sure how long each one was taking. So the same residents were coming back to us week after week after week, getting more and more annoyed, and I understood exactly why they were doing it, because every time they asked us as people they expect to know, we could never provide them an answer. So even if it's the case of we can get an answer to say that, look, the grass isn't going to be cut on the schedule that we want to, but in 4 weeks it's going to be cut, people will at least then have an answer that they can take away. They may not be happy with the answer, and I understand why they wouldn't be, but we're at least providing an answer to people, and we were trapped in that position of not being able to do that. So I hope, in terms of the year coming forward, it sounds like we're putting in great stuff in terms of looking at the plans, and I really echo the point around speaking to councillors about the plans. Obviously, we had a good walk around the other day. I've picked out 5 locations for wildflowers in my ward. I've got a community orchard location, which all take away some areas that would have been grass growth, and some of the areas I would have suggested it turned out we were already doing, which I think, again, I thought was great. But around that councillor involvement in those plans, I think is crucial. But just around us being able to go to residents and not say, do you know what, I've got no idea at all what's happening, being able to say, we'd like it to be sooner, but in 4 weeks, this is when we've been told it's going to be done. We can at least then give residents answers so that they've got an answer to the questions that they're having. But hopefully we won't be in that position again, but if we are, I cannot urge enough the importance of communication with all councillors, because it wasn't just one ward getting this, it was every ward and it was every councillor that was getting it. So really appreciate if that's something that we can take forward. And looking at some of the planned actions at 4.9, so just on the additional team members, so 3 additional team members were added into the South team. Was that because there were vacancies in the South team? Was that because there's more demand in the South team? What sort of led to it being the South team?
Thanks, Chair. So the North and South is split, as I've explained, and the North and South have different kind of landscapes. So the South has a lot more kind of rabbit runs, if you like, whereas the North has more wider open spaces. So, but the gardeners are broadly split evenly amongst the two. It was just more sickness in the and conduct issues within the south one, which meant staff weren't available. Now, resources were taken from the north team eventually to help and help mitigate that, but yeah, so it was staff.
Okay, fab, thanks, Lee. And the final question from me really is in the sentence, I think it's the one below that one, so encourage low maintenance landscaping across public open spaces. It sounds, forgive me, it sounds a bit like rewilding by a slightly different name. Can you just expand a little bit around that one? What kind of things would that mean? What would it look like? And in terms of kind of any kind of consultation that would be done either with councillors or with the public, what would we see that looking like?
Thanks very much. So it feeds into the longer term plan of 12 to 36 months about that grassland management plan. So it's probably just a mixing up of terminology. It means grassland management plan, but within that there will be areas that aren't maintained at the frequency or might not be maintained at the frequency that they are or should be now for different reasons. So that might be for biodiversity reasons because there are bits of open space that aren't used that much by dog walkers, that aren't used for event space. So why we're killing ourselves trying to cut it low when verges and other priority areas are suffering because of that. So it's more around the terminology thing. It's grassland management plan, but within that there will be areas that are potentially maintained less frequently than they are now to help benefit those other areas identified.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Liz. Owen?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Just on the back of what Lee just said, mentioned there, I think where we are looking at developing those ward plans, essentially, which looks at all of the green spaces and those open spaces and how they would be maintained, is that we'd be doing that in consultation and alongside councillors and community. So it wouldn't just be a case of that all of a sudden there'd be a green space that's just got a low maintenance landscaping approach attached to it. We would be doing that alongside people to say, we've mapped the entire ward area. This is actually how we think or proposing it should look, and then that's where that consultation would come into there. So that local knowledge really feeding into that process.
Councillor Falco, saw your hand. Have you got a form of words?
All I'd like to say is that we've kicked these two chaps all night. Every single one of us had a go at them, and I'd like to thank them and thank them for their honest answers. Thank you.
I'd absolutely agree, and yes, thank you both for coming. Obviously, as a scrutiny board, it's our duty to scrutinise, and I think this year, not been the year we would have wanted, but I am happy to see that some things are being put in place for next year to change that. So, Councillor Falk, just quickly remind me of the sort of general theme of the recommendation that you were thinking of. Okay, so I get the sense then, without trying to determine specific pots, I think we'll get into all sorts of problems there. Can I suggest then that the committee recommends that the Cabinet members seek to ensure the appropriate funding is provided to the Grounds Maintenance Department to ensure that grass cutting is on the schedule that residents would expect? In that case, Councillor Fatt, would you be happy to propose that? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Ingle, are you happy to second? Fab. Can I take a vote on that one? Everybody in favour? Anybody against? No. Fantastic. Okay, any further questions or comments on this particular item? No, in that case, thank you both for coming on, and our thanks to yourselves. If you can take back our thanks to the teams for the work they do as well, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you both. Okay, so in that case then we'll move on to item 7 on our agenda, so section 106 agreements, and Paul, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say from one underfunded team to another. I brought Rachel along with me tonight. Rachel deals primarily not exclusively with Section 106s. Rachel is the only member, full-time member of the Section 106 team. And just to put it into context, I mentioned local plan earlier. When we did the local plan, the current one, in 2016-2017, we had 9 members of staff to deliver the local plan. The reason it's delayed is I've got 3 members of the team trying to do the local plan, which 9 people did previously. Anyway, less of that. You asked for Section 106 agreements and a bit of an overview. What are they? The Section 106 agreement is a legal agreement. Now, it's to mitigate the impacts of development. So if you have no development in your ward, there's no Section 106 money coming to you in your ward, broadly. So if you have development in your ward, we try to mitigate the impacts of that development from the developer. So if the building, usually it's housing. Use housing as the example. If you have housing in your ward, it will have an impact on highways, education, doctors' surgeries, open space, etc., etc., down to traffic lights and crossings. We try to mitigate that. We get the developer to pay for that mitigation. We also get the developer to pay for affordable housing out of that pot. I say pot because it's like a pot or a cake. Our priority is affordable housing. It takes a big slice. What's left is the rest of the mitigation, which Rachel and her colleagues negotiate with the developer to get the developer to pay us or give us revenue or capital to support the mitigation. Cannot use it to mitigate existing deficiencies. So if it's something we should be doing, like grass cutting, I can't get the developer to provide us money to do grass cutting. I can if they're providing a bit more open space. But usually you get the open space and the play equipment and the affordable housing and contribution towards the school maybe, and there's very little left in the pot after the developer's viability. There's various tests. We have government tests to follow to get this mitigation, get this money. It's mostly for, as I say, for financial, for capital projects. But if they're giving us a building, we might be able to get out of them some revenue to upkeep, to maintain that building over a short period. So the key ones, and apologies that they're so small, don't make it any bigger. Those bullet points are the things that we look for when mitigating the impacts. So affordable housing, as I said, top of our list. That's prime. Open space, because we need the house builders to build. They build houses, but we like to get out of them. The open space that's going to help the residents live in the area. Education. They need somewhere for the kids to go to school. Often schools are full or close to being full already, so we need new schools provided. It's usually easier to get primary schools than it is secondary schools, because you need a much bigger catchment area for secondary schools. There's always going to be transport implications with every development. It's going to have knock-on effects, it'll have wider effects on junctions which might not be close to the site. Community centres, sports facilities, health facilities, and any other site specifics that are needed. This is one question that I will be posing tomorrow night to the cross-party member working group and to Cabinet and generally to members. Is that bullet point list correct? Do you want to see things coming off the list so we get more of something else? And I'll throw into the mix now, just to be argumentative, doctors' surgeries. I've had examples where we've provided a site for a doctor's surgery via Section 106, but the doctors didn't want to move to the site. So at the end of the specified period, that site goes back to the developer. we've lost that element where I could have spent that money on affordable housing or had the site provided for affordable housing. I'd much rather get affordable housing as my priority with 11,000 plus on the waiting list than a doctor's surgery. It's emotive because you will get, from whenever house building takes place in your wards, but what about the doctor's surgery? What about the facilities? Doctor's surgery is a kind of a private institution. I can lead them to water, but I can't make them drink.
Can I just check, Paul, just before we move off that list, is that ordered in priority, or is that just the order that they appear on there?
That's just the order they appear. No priority whatsoever, although, as I've said, affordable housing for me is the priority. I think transport, open space come pretty close second, with education third, but that might change if there's 2,000 homes, say, allocation close to you, and there's no school places. I don't want the kids being bused across the city. Section 106 is a legal agreement, so once it's signed, it is signed, sealed, and we're expecting payments within certain time periods from the developers. Viability. This is where the developers say to us, I can't afford that. Well, we don't trust them. We go to the district valuer. So the district valuer assesses not what they've paid for the site, but what the site is worth and whether they can, with all their build costs, what can they afford? That is the sum that we work with in the negotiation. The DV is seen as the arbiter between developers saying I can't afford anything and we're saying you can afford everything on that previous list. Once we know what is in the pot, if you like, the DV's pot, then we can apportion elements in order of priority maybe, or in order of where the site is. Highways, education might come top of the list, but affordable housing is going to linger there quite high up. If a site is unviable, and there are several city centre sites where the district valuer said, yep, I agree, they can't pay Section 106 now, we use what is called a clawback mechanism. So we recognise, grant you planning permission, you can't afford it now, but in 5 years' time, or when the development finishes, we will reassess. If you've made a profit more than you felt you were going to make, we'll have some of that, thank you very much, because we still have those priorities. A good bit, how can you get involved? How can members get involved? I think we've circulated the members' guide, thank you, which I think we should do to all members anyway. That could be a recommendation from this meeting. All members, read and digest, and Mr. Clark will come and test you on it. The members' guide, 3 ways you can get involved. At yearly ward priority settings, some wards do, some don't. During the planning application and the Section 106, every Friday, usually without fail, there is a weekly planning list sent out, and there's a column added. It's in ward order as well, so it's easy. If you're in Alistair, you're near the top. And it has Section 106 next to it. That, then, you can delve into that application or contact me or Rach, and we can let you know what the Section 106 broad heads of terms are likely to be, because it's only just arrived. And or during the monitoring process, there's a quarterly report that Rachel does, which analyses Section 106 and how it's coming in and how it's being spent, how it's going out. Obviously, funding of projects is an interesting one, because obviously our recipient departments, we get the money coming in when development, at key milestones through the development, and it'll go out to, let's use parks as an example, it'll go out to parks, but it's a sum of a couple of £100, not enough to do a project with, so they'll bank it and wait till there's a project there. We tell them what the terms of the Section 106 is. You've got to spend it by X. therefore they'll apportion it to a larger project. So they're not always spent quickly by departments. And Section 106 is reported to the government in a funding statement, and we have to, as it says at the bottom, it's part of a regular audit. We get audited on Section 106, and we do really well given the number of staff, and our process and functions are rigorously checked, and we come out as excellent. And I don't like giving money back to developers. We shouldn't be doing that. So we have these we regularly prompt our recipient departments. You know, what are you doing with this? It's coming up for spend. You need to do something with it. Members like the sums. This is how much money at the year end 23-24 was available. 16 million over those. We've secured that through Section 106. Wish I had that as my budget. But you can see what it's for affordable housing, health, sport and leisure, parks, community centres and so on and so forth. So that was what was available to spend in the capital programme for 24-25. In 23-24 we spent it on, so spent 6 million on, 4 million on education. Probably a new school. Snellswell Primary.
3.6, next slide.
Yeah, although that wasn't all the budget, but yeah, in this year, some of it's been in this year, but yeah.
Sport and leisure, parks, community centres, etc. And there we go. Snellswell Primary, 3,686,000.
But the actual project was a lot higher than that, but that was in that particular year.
That's right, in that year. Football hub on the racecourse ground, etc., etc. So we can evidence this, the spend, through those various departments. We get the money in, give it to them and say, get on with it, spend it in these. This is how it's been arrived at for leisure, for mitigating the impact on public open space, etc., etc. So what changes can be made to what we secure? I raise those bullet points and what can we change, where can we focus, can we do a rigorous assessment of them, because we can only do it through the local plan. And the new local plan's coming up for consultation next summer, so it would be nice to get members thinking, come to me or Rachel, on what are your priorities, where do you think the Section 106 spends could be, what could we lose off that list if necessary. Previous government wanted to get rid of the supplementary planning document, the guide that you've got. Current government aren't saying they're going to, but aren't saying they're not. So I'm hoping they don't, because it's easier to put the Section 106 stuff in a supplementary document, but you need a policy to be supplemental to the policies in the local plan. There are alternatives to Section 106. CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy. That is a fixed sum per square metre secured in all developments. It's clear and it applies to all development. However, it has to be set at the lowest threshold. So I'll use the example, Sinfin and Allestree. Sinfin land prices are low, Allestree land prices are high. So CIL would be charged at what you can get on Sinfin land prices, not Allestree. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. So you get very little for Allestree developments because it's such a low. We get more, we think, and we tested it in 2013 and 2016. Sorry, I'm guessing it's on the slide. We had it tested, and we can get more through Section 106 than we can through CIL. So we're sticking with Section 106. We may actually go and test it again, funding provided, but it costs to be told the answer we think we know anyway. And I'd much rather focus on getting the Section 106 in and getting the local plan done. Just covered all that. And my focus is getting the local plan and the local plan policies in place that reflect aims and aspirations of councillors, of the council. And it's back to that bullet point list. That is the end. So I'll go back to that bullet point list. For me, affordable housing, yes. Tick. Open space, yes. Education, definitely. Transport, yep. To be radical, do we need community centres? Do we need sports facilities? Do we need health facilities? You'd probably say yes, but if I've got a priority, if I've only got a limited sum to throw the money at, I'd much rather spend it on transport, education, open space and affordable housing. And anything else you might wish that comes up. Stunned you all into silence now, but thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Open to any questions from anybody. Councillor Norris?
I might as well start. We've got the most development in our area, and it's the least money we get in our area. Well, how does that work? 106.
It comes on the back of housing applications, so it would be proportionate to those housing applications. We don't get Section 106, for instance, on houses in multiple occupation. It's on the new builds, which primarily last time round, the current local plan, Micklover, Mackworth, Sinfin, nothing at Spondon, Chellaston, Oakwood Grange, etc. Oakwood. But it comes on the back of housing developments. If there are housing developments and they are crying viability issues, you might get it a bit later down the line.
Sorry, I was just...
You've got...
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that's a really key sort of element, that in the city centre, so sites like the DRI, sites like Friargates, Goodyard, they are all sites that we do have viability challenges on those sites. They've all been through the district valuer, and we have, on both of those sites, we have been able to secure some Section 106 from those sites, but through through negotiation. But the district valuer has sort of rigorously assessed both of those sites, just as examples, and has found that they're not able to produce policy compliant Section 106 packages. So that's the reason why, sort of in the city centre, that you might think, there's lots and lots of development, but there's not much Section 106. But that's primarily the reason.
Well, that Castle Board, that's
Sorry, I'll come in there because...
Sorry, I missed the question.
The DRI paid a contribution towards the new school on Castle Ward, I believe.
Yeah.
And the DRI Castle Ward scheme we've just approved on Full Street and Friargate Goodyard, I believe, are all subject to that clawback mechanism that I mentioned. We won't be getting the money now, but we will be assessing it at the later stages, because Friargate, for instance, Friargate Goodyard, they've got to plough a whole lot of money into those two listed buildings to bring, so they're saying we can't afford anything. Well, you bring them up to speed, you bring them, get them occupied, get some of those 200 houses built, and then we'll reassess.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just to confirm, there is a clawback at Full Street, not at Friargates Goodyard. because having looked at all the factors involved in that, there was such a significant cost of reusing and refurbishing those listed buildings and bringing that site back into use, that it was just sort of felt that that wouldn't be, you know, there would never really be that viability there.
I think just very quickly, when we're talking then about the viability, just to sort of further establish the sort of people and process. So, say we've got a development, it's bringing in £100,000 of Section 106. Who exactly is it that says, okay, well, we're going to do parks, community centres and highways, and we're going to split it 20, 30 and 50,000? Who sort of is it that does that, and what's the process undertaken to bring that about?
So we've got the supplementary planning document, and that sets out what a developer would pay for each, from all different types of development throughout the city. So depending on the size of that development, all of those requirements go to make up what we'd call a policy compliant Section 106 package. If a developer comes to us and says, we can't afford to pay all of that, or we need to pay that in stages or anything like that, then that's when obviously the negotiation starts. And then that's when we start to look at what the priorities are. So, for example, we were talking about Snellsmore Grange earlier in the example that Councillor Ingle mentioned. And for that, the priority for that site had to be education, because we needed a primary school on that site. That site would not have been acceptable in planning terms if we hadn't had that school. But that school, yes, you saw on there that there was £3 million that we spent in that year, but the actual cost of providing that school was actually, we got a contribution from that site of, I think, £7.5 million. So that's really significant. So then you have to start to look at, well, what else can I afford from that, and then how do I make that up? So we talk to the departments. Councillors are welcome to talk to us as well about what their priorities are. And then, we take all of that into account, and then we make a recommendation to planning committee. If the site goes to planning committee, then obviously, if committee are not happy with that recommendation, they can tell us. That has happened in the past, and we've been back and spoken to the developers to come up with a different package which prioritised different things. So that's kind of sort of how it works.
Yep. Anybody else? Yep, Councillor Ingle.
So let's get this right. So people who are building houses give us money called Section 106, and then we spend it on providing affordable houses. Why doesn't the developer just build affordable houses in the first place?
So in majority of cases, that is what happens. Our preference is always to seek on-site affordable housing, but sometimes for viability reasons, they can't afford to provide affordable housing on site. So we will then negotiate with them for them to pay a contribution which might be less than the subsidy that they would have to put in order to provide on-site affordable housing. There's also quite a significant problem, which is actually a nationwide problem at the moment, because the developers don't actually own the affordable housing in perpetuity going forward. They sell them to registered providers at an agreed subsidy. But there's a real nationwide problem at the moment where registered providers just aren't taking on these Section 106 units. And it's a really significant problem. It's impacting us, it's impacting lots of other authorities. So we're having to find more creative ways of getting affordable housing in the city without involving those registered providers. And at the moment, one of the ways that we can do that is by getting in a commuted sum, which is that's what's happened at the DRI site. We've got quite a significant commuted sum, because they had an obligation to provide affordable housing, but they couldn't find anybody to take those affordable units on.
I have to come back on that point. I spoke to Maria Murphy, director of Derby Homes, the other day, who told me that she's buying houses left, right and centre and can't buy them fast enough. So I don't understand why Derby Homes aren't buying them. If you're telling me they're not buying them, that we need to get Maria Murphy to this.
They are buying.
Thank you. If what we're told, what's being told, you said a second ago, was nobody's coming in and buying them. I would suggest, Chair, that you get Maria Murphy here at the next meeting and ask her why she's not buying properties.
Okay, yeah, Rachel, do you want to come out?
No, all I was going to say is, you know, Derby Homes are buying some of the properties, and I'm sure Derby Homes will go into more detail the reasons why they don't buy all of the properties. It's probably too much of a complex issue to go into in this presentation because it's, you know, a whole other issue. So yeah, I would suggest that's probably a good idea.
I think what we'll do then is in the work plan, I think we've just found an item for January's meeting, potentially there. Okay.
Just to come back on Councillor Ingall's question. Back in the day, when I dealt with West Chellaston, yes, it's my fault, we got the affordable housing provided on site because the developers played along with us. Yes, they put it all together, and I'd much rather have it pepper-potted around the development, but they put it on site because it was a greenfield site. The DRI and a lot of the inner city sites are difficult sites to develop. They've got to clean them up, and they're not viable, which is why we get the money as opposed to the housing provided. I'd love to have the housing provided on site. It saves us, we've got a pot of money, but we can't spend it because we haven't got any sites. I'd much rather have them, because they're house builders, to build the affordable housing for us. But it lowers their viability to a threshold that they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do the scheme.
Because I know at one time, Mr. Clark, it was 30%. When a new estate was coming forward, it was 30%. But the developers always get that knocked down, and then it's normally about 5, isn't it? And that just leads up. Anyway, I'll shut up next. I know that somebody else has got some questions.
Okay, any more questions for anybody? Oh, Councillor Falk, I'll go to you first.
I say, excuse my slight ignorance on some of this, but I'm just asking questions that... is it only city sustainability and regeneration that have control over S106 and not other departments like community safety and such like? Because in Alveston South, where I'm a councillor, we've applied for some safety cameras, which the residents wanted, and we're actually paying it out of neighbourhood board because we couldn't get any further with those. And I just wondered, what's the situation with that?
Just on that example, I would question, how do those safety cameras mitigate the impact of a housing development? I'd have to show the linkage between the two. So if, for instance, you've got a housing scheme nearby and there are going to be, not existing, but going to be safety problems, then you've got a linkage. Just because there's a need already isn't a reason to use Section 106 money. Because the housing will create a problem. It creates traffic, it creates doctors' surgeries, or patients, sorry, I should say. It creates kids for the school. I couldn't pinpoint it creating a problem because it's an existing problem. So you're using the right money for the right things now. And that's if we're ever asked, we've got this money, the developers have given us this money for their houses, they'll want to know how you've spent it that is a direct relevance to their residents of their houses that they've built. Thank you, Chair.
A follow-up on that, because in 2022, Alveston Shopping Precinct was awarded £750,000 S106 money, and since then nothing's been spent and it's just disappeared, and the councillors haven't been informed as to where it's been reappropriated and why it's not been used.
I think we'll come back to you on that specific example. Yeah.
Will you inform the councillors of Alveston North? I mean, I'm Alveston South, it still affects me. But they've been asking me this question.
I think this is something that I've been talking to Councillor Graves about over a number of years.
I'm
And I think, yeah, I don't think we necessarily need to go into specific examples in this meeting, so I think we'll pick that up separately. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do take the point, Paul, around that thing of being able to prove that this is required because of the new development. I know we had, I think, Rachel, it was you and I that spoke about trying to secure some of the B bus stops in Oakwood from one of the developments from Section 106, and it did get undone on the question, how can you prove this is needed because of the new estate? We wanted them, and I'd love to have them, but in terms of undoing that question, I admitted that we did get stuck on trying to find a way of that, so I think that's probably where the linkage there comes in. Any more? Yep, Councillor Ingle.
I just want to ask, you're on about this, the money from a housing development to make things better in the ward, so to speak. Right, so we've got a crossing on High Street, so we've had all the new houses, we've got extra cars coming down, we've got extra people, we've got extra children. We have a crossing on High Street that really, really needs updating, and we keep getting told, no, we haven't got the money, we haven't got the money, whereas we should be having some 106 money, we should be able to use 106 money to update that crossing because of all the extra people from the housing development.
It comes out during the consultation period with our highway colleagues. And I can think of an example where they said a crossing was needed. It was Michelova. They said that to encourage pedestrians to walk from the housing development into Michelova, they had to cross Ladybank Road, new crossing being provided. I suspect the answer is that they haven't got any money, you haven't got any money for it because it wasn't identified by our highway colleagues as a desire line effectively. It was too far away maybe, I don't know, from the development. Yes, it got road, there was a whole raft of road improvements, wasn't there, and roundabouts, etc., in between us and the county. But whether, if for instance, on the Snellsmore Grange scheme, there was a, I don't know, school opposite, built opposite the development, you could see a need for a crossing, whether there was a highway need for the existing crossing to be upgraded, or whether it's actually meets the highway officer's requirements standards now. I don't know. But it's that sort of thought process. Where is the desire line? Where will people walk? We want to encourage people to walk.
Why is there a time frame for spending? So, you know, as you said, I don't like giving this money back, and I know some from Chellaston was given back in 2005, if you recall, Paul. Before my time, I'll just add for the record. But why is there a time frame? Why, you know, it's some are 5 years, some are 10 years. If they're giving us that money, surely we shouldn't have to give it back, period, end of. You know, we might want to roll it in with something else.
There are legal and national requirements to work with or work within, and it's a reasonable prospect. The one we gave back was an absence of public open space being provided. I hated that. Yes, I do recall that. Because we couldn't provide the open space. We had to give it back within that time frame, and that's about right, isn't it? Yeah. We just have to work with, and they know the game, we know the game, and it's a game. We will end up with this pot of spend which we want to benefit the future residents, I nearly said existing then, the future residents of the city to help mitigate the impact. But it does benefit the existing residents because it mitigates the impact of that new development.
Yes, I remember saying the money going back before my time, 2005 it was, and I know it hurt then, you know, and it was quite a significant amount of money, wasn't it? So, just recently we've been doing some upgrades on the A514, having new traffic lights in the middle of Chellaston and in Sheltrock, and I also understand that Ascot Drive are going to be done soon. However, they're not actually an improvement. They're just replacing what is actually worn out. Is that really what S106 money should be used for? It should be used to improve an offer, not replace something. Anyway, that should be built into the revenue programme. So I'm not sure that if the use of S106 is right on that occasion.
Yeah, ideally. I mean, obviously, we can only go, sort of with what, highways are telling us. So if highways are telling us it's an improvement, that's, because at the end of the day, we have to sort of assess what, if we think it's suitable, and if highways are sort of saying, oh, we're upgrading a crossing, that sounds, reasonable to say, you're making an improvement. Obviously, it's down to, sort of a judgment. But it's useful to have that, sort of feedback, because if you're sort of saying, well, actually, it's not an improvement at all. It's just a replacement. And it doesn't actually provide any, sort of additional facilities. Then, that's useful feedback for us to understand that, sort of an improvement doesn't necessarily mean an improvement in facilities, I suppose.
I suppose it's an improvement in terms of longevity of the equipment. I don't want the developers asking the question and we're just giving the money back.
I'll accept that point then, Mr. Clark. Well done. May I make a suggestion, Chair, through the Chair, if I may? Forgive me if I'm right. Rachel, didn't you used to come to neighbourhood board meetings?
Yes, I've attended them on occasion, yes.
May I suggest that Rachel attends the neighbourhood board meeting and we can, and councillors from all across the city can give us some feedback of where they would like the money spending in the future?
So what I think I'm going to do is I've got a sort of recommendation in a sense along similar lines, but worded from the other point of view. So I'll come back to that one if that's okay. Councillor Falk, see your hand?
I think this is another one that you'll come back to me on, but Alveston Park is going to be put under new management, but none of us were consulted at all, and I just wondered why this was.
I imagine that's a question for parks as opposed to planning.
I'd agree on that. I think you're going to want parks and leisure on that one. Councillor Core?
Just a very quick thank you for explaining it so well, and especially the guide. I wish that was the case kind of all the time, being the council. I just found that very, very useful, and some of the, I suppose, intricacies of and detail that you don't normally kind of understand.
It is, thank you, it is a really complex area which Rach and her colleagues do really well with. When you're fighting against developers who want to build houses and not give you any money, so it's that part of that negotiation period. I've seen complaints to me from developers saying, we want to build this, but your team have sent me a whole list of, and it's 11, 12 million, we can't afford that. And that's where the negotiation starts. And that's where those bullet points, you start taking them off, you start assessing what's needed in that particular area to get down to something that they can accept, that we can, and the district valuer can accept before granting planning permission. Thank you.
Yep, Councillor Ingle.
It's only a quick one. It was just on the costings for the pedestrian crossing at Ryber Drive in Chellaston. Obviously, it was 74,500, but there was one that went in on Chain Lane. There was a lot less money. I just can't work out how, because I thought it was just a basic crossing that went in Chellaston.
Yeah, I think it's just that was a sort of a contribution towards it. So sorry.
Because ours was a lot more.
Yeah. I think that was a contribution, I think, towards Chain Lane, because obviously Section 106 isn't the only money that's used for projects. Right. Sometimes it's just part of the Highways Capital Programme.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any more from anybody at all? Councillor Falk?
Who has the say over health on S106?
On health?
Health, yeah. Like you put on the list of priorities and things.
As I said, we I forget what they're called now. I'll call them the NHS. They keep changing their name so many times. We work with the NHS, identify where there are holes in their coverage, where there might need to be new doctor surgeries, etc. And we will negotiate with them And a good example is Radbourne Lane, development in Amber Valley. That's provided doctors' money for Section 106 money for doctor's surgery, which is being provided or worked up via the NHS with us on the opposite the shops at Mackworth. Coming soon as a scheme, but they're working with us. But they have to work with us, and they need doctors to come to those facilities. Again, I can ask the developer to build a doctor, send me a site, build a doctor's surgery, but I can't make the doctors come because they haven't got the population, and neither can the NHS. So it's one, I would drop it off the list because we're spending an awful lot of time and effort and money that we're not getting. But it's topical for members and members of the public.
It's like that. In Alveston South, we've got a high percentage of men's mental health and issues like that. Can we apply for 106 money for something? Because ones that we've spoken to, they said, well, it's all very well, but we don't want to join a knitting group, but we want to go to a group that makes things, a workshop, something like that. Can we apply for 106 money for that?
It's back to that golden thread. Only if there is a development that's provided Section 106 money and those people are going to be living there to go to that group. So you can't cover existing problems. You can try and predict new problems and mitigate it because the residents are going to come from that new community, but not from existing ones. That's the difficulty. It's not a golden pot that you can use for existing problems. But if the new development provides, I don't know, 2,000 new houses, 4,000 new people, where are those 4,000 people going to go? Schooling, travel, those basic ones on the list. But I can't solve everybody's problems with existing ones.
So basically, if we apply for all these bits in Salismore Grange, it's part of our ward, if we could get an S106 in them, but not for the old bit of Alveston.
It's for those existing residents, so those new residents in those new properties, you'd have to mitigate their impact. You'd have to link it back to the new residents. So a new football pitch, new upgrading existing sporting facilities, new pedestrian crossing to link them to that football pitch and the sporting facilities, a new school, etc., but not covering existing problems that might be in the community.
Councillor Core?
I just wanted to say, I think, especially as a newer councillor, I don't say new anymore, but those, well, I could call them case studies even, of where, especially the doctor thing that you mentioned, is very useful, because I would say, oh no, health is very, very important, but if there's if there's lots of cases where that's not worked out, just as an example, that's very useful to know. And I don't envy your position because you're asking us to predict problems, whereas we every day are faced with current problems. So it's very, very hard to think in the future when you go, actually, no, this needs doing now. So I can imagine you get a lot of back and forth with us with that. But just on that point, I think that kind of thing is quite useful for us to know. I don't know if that's something you could collate in the future or something like that.
Through you, Chair, I would promote, I do a training session every, as Martin knows, every 5 o'clock before every planning committee meeting in the Joseph Wright, and it's on everything planning, it's not just Section 106. But from the discussions with the NHS, I've got a feeling it was something like 30,000 residents that generates a doctor's surgery. It's something big figure like that, whereas 200, 2,000 residents doesn't generate, it's not enough for an existing practice to set up, because effectively they're paid by the NHS on the number of residents they've got. I don't know, £100 per person on your waiting list. So it needs to be a significant population to make the doctor's surgery work, unless you're an existing one moving over. And I think that's Mackworth is an existing one moving over. So So a new one is very difficult, or the existing ones don't want to move because it upsets their customers, their patients, because they move to a different site. And I just hate giving money back, which could have been better spent on affordable housing or education or something else, not just to have, and then some say, we don't need it now, we don't want it, we're not going to take it. That doesn't seem right to me.
Okay, any further questions for anybody at all? Okay, I've just got a couple of quick ones and then I'll put a recommendation forward. So we've referenced some funding that nearly was lost in Chellaston a number of years ago. We had a close call in Oakwood last year. We nearly lost about £40,000. I think we spent it with about 3 weeks left to spare because we didn't see it. We thought we had longer on it. The department weren't looking to us to spend it. We'd asked several times that we wanted to spend it. We were waiting for them to come back to us. And to the credit, it was Councillor Truella that said, we do realise this goes out in March, don't we? And we managed to get it spent, thankfully, on exactly what we wanted it to be. But we were within weeks of losing it. Have we lost much Section 106 in the last financial year or the year before?
No, we haven't given any Section 106 back for 10 years. So, yeah.
It pained me to give that back. Sorry, I apologise.
The letter's been paid to me.
It was just wrong. The house, it was West Chellaston, the whole housing that was there, and we didn't have the open space. Timed out. We had to give it back. It just felt wrong.
I think it's worth saying we always, we always do our best. If we find that Section 106, through no fault of our own, are expiring for whatever reason, we always try and negotiate with developers to get a good outcome. And, it was painful that, we weren't able to on that particular occasion.
So I'll move on really to the recommendation, and I make this one sort of in an ironic way really, because my ward's got no Section 106 left at all. We spent all of ours. But I have got a concern that some money that almost would have been to mine, because it's from a development that moved into my ward in the boundary changes in 2023, some money that's going somewhere else, I've got concerns that that's not going to be spent. And I wouldn't have known before really now how to bring that up in the most appropriate way to do it. So the recommendation that I want to make along the lines of what you suggested, Councillor English, is threefold really, which is, first of all, that a Section 106 session be part of a future all-councillor training session. Secondly is that the councillor guide on Section 106 is sent out with the next quarterly report that goes out. And third is that all councillors are encouraged to invite a Section 106 representative to a board meeting in whatever form their ward holds them to discuss their existing Section 106 fund. So rather than putting the emphasis on yourselves to go to a meeting, I think the emphasis needs to be on us to invite officers to a meeting and discuss the points that we want to get across. And then if it doesn't happen, it's not officers that didn't do it, it's us as councillors that didn't do it. And I think we then take the onus on ourselves that it's for us to do that. So I think I'd be happy to propose that if anyone was happy to second. Yeah, we'll take somebody. And I think given everyone's hand went up to second, I think we can take that as everybody in favour of that one. And what I'll do is I'll take the onus on to email all councillors and encourage them to invite a Section 106 representative to a future board meeting. Okay, fantastic. So with no further questions, thank you both for the report, and apologies you waited as long as you have. So moving on then to our final item for this meeting, so the work programme 24-25. So we've got our January meeting, we've got the bulky waste collection report on there. I'll see what I can do about what we've discussed about the Derby homes and bringing another report on that around purchasing some of these affordable homes. To save everybody the time, I think we'll put another meeting on around sort of March, April time. But if you have any suggestions for the work programme, please just drop me an email and we'll get something added on that. Okay, so with nothing else to go, that closes today's meeting. Thank you all for your attendance.